and today it's my pleasure to turn over to my colleague Joyce Whirling, the director of our Strategic Public Relations Program, the moderating function. All yours.
Wow, thanks, Geneva. Then I'll just stand up and not get to eat.
Sorry about that.
No, that's okay. We're really, really fortunate today because when you think about major institutions in Los Angeles, over time, historically, one that immediately springs to mind is the LA Police Department. It's got a rich history here. It's had some interesting events in its history. It's had some very exciting and positive things happen in recent years. And with us today is Mary Grady, who's head of public information for the LAPD. And I wouldn't normally read somebody's bio, and I'd ask them to repeat it, but I know she's a very modest person. So let me just briefly go through this thing because it's pretty interesting. In 2001, Mary Grady was hired for the newly created position of LAPD Public Information Director. Her responsibilities include advising department management on the effects of department policies and procedures with the public, developing long-term strategy for partnership with the media, promoting the department, so on and so forth. Mary also created the Entertainment Trademark Unit within the department, which protects the department's intellectual property rights, works with the city attorney's office to identify possible causes for action against violators, and coordinates entertainment projects, so on and so forth. And she had a really interesting development on the way over here today relating to this that she's going to talk to you about briefly. Let's see, skipping ahead. Under Mary's leadership, the LAPD Media Relations Section received the Radio Television News Association Southern California's Freedom of Information Award. Mary is an award-winning veteran broadcast journalist with 20 years of experience. This includes 13 years in the LA media market. The Academy of Television Arts and Sciences has recognized Mary's work and honored her with 3 Emmys. The Radio and Television News Directors Association has awarded Mary with 4 Golden Mike Awards. She has been named the Associated Press Reporter of the Year and has been recognized for her work by the LA Press Club and Women in Radio and Television. She's a graduate of, as I recall, it's Arizona.
University of Arizona.
All of you have heard of the University of Arizona, maybe it's all right. With a degree in radio and television, a minor in speech communication. So Mary is one of those people who's had a really rich background in journalism and transitioned into public relations, public information. And as if that wasn't good enough, she has to do it with one of the most interesting organizations in the Southern California market. So with that, take it away, Mary.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, just have to ask. Are you all here because of me or because it's free lunch?
You.
Oh, okay, thanks. I always get a little embarrassed when people read bios because let me tell you, it means absolutely nothing to your 17-year-old when she will do her own. Okay, so yeah, I have kind of an interesting background. I was one of those students who went to U of A and I didn't know what I wanted to major in, so I signed up for fashion merchandising and journalism thinking, well, I'll be a fashion writer, right? Well, 2 years of getting through all my general studies initially, at the end of my sophomore year, a friend of mine walked into my dorm room and said, I'm going to change my major. And I said, to what? She said, radio and television. I said, oh, that sounds good. I'll go with you. So I did. Walked in, changed my major, started junior year, started taking broadcasting classes, and decided I wanted to be a speech communication minor, and I fell in love with it. And what I wanted to do, my goal, was to be a sportscaster. So I got out of college, and my first job was as a sportscaster in Roswell, New Mexico. Everybody know what Roswell's famous for, right? Yeah, the alien. 4 months later, I got an offer to do news in Amarillo, Texas. And I left sports because I realized after 4 months, the only thing that changes in sports, or at least back then, before scandals a la Tiger Woods, was scores, salaries, and names. And it got a little boring. And during the week, I got to do breaking news. And I got the breaking news bug. That was my adrenaline fix. And the story that made me realize I really wanted to do news was we had lightning strikes at a refinery. And one of the tanks caught on fire. And it got so hot and blew off sparks, the tank next to it caught on fire. And that fire burned for 22 hours straight, and I covered it, jumped on a fire truck, drove right into it. It got so hot, I looked like I had a really bad sunburn, and my camera shut down. I was my own photographer at the time. So I loved breaking news. Stayed in television news, came here to Los Angeles, did news for almost 14 years here in Los Angeles. And one night when I was at Channel 2, I was the lead reporter on the 11 o'clock news, worked at KCBS, and they gave me my assignment for the night. And that night I said, I've got to find something else. In part because news here in Los Angeles is different than news in, say, Amarillo or Tulsa, Oklahoma, where I also worked. Here it's much more entertainment driven. That night, the lead story on Channel 2 was Pamela Anderson getting her implants removed. Right. My parents paid for 4 years of college for that. No. So I decided I really needed to try and find something else to do that would actually allow me to utilize more of my talents. I had ideas, and I wanted to be creative, and I really wanted to do something that actually helped the community, that was maybe a little something different than just educating the public. So I started my own PR consulting firm and started working with a number of clients on the side while I was still doing TV news. And back in 2000, the LAPD decided maybe we should have a civilian, not a sworn, doing media relations and communications. And I always likened it to, you would not give me a gun and throw me in black and white and say, go answer 911 calls. I don't have the training to do that. Trust me, the way I shoot, you wouldn't want me to. So they decided to have a civilian do it. So they put, job out there, and I applied with about 80, 85 other people. And I feel very, very fortunate that I was chosen as the department's first ever public information director. And what's kind of fun, and I don't know if I did this, Jerry, last time I spoke, because I'm the department's first ever, the Police Historical Society has decided that as soon as I retire, I have to give this to the Police Historical Society because it is the first ever. And that's the first ever. You can pass it around the room and look. That's my civilian badge. Department never created a badge for a public information director. It's got number 1 on it. So that's why the Historical Society wants that badge. So I feel very fortunate. I'm a part of the department now. I'm part of the department's history. It was interesting because when I did my application for this position, I did it like a press kit. Okay? I thought, well, if you're applying for a PR job, you just don't send your resume and you just don't send a cover letter. I created a press kit. I was the only one who did that. I stood out from the pack. That's what made me different. Now, when I graduated from U of A, I really wanted to stand out with all those other journalism students who wanted to get television jobs. So I actually sent my resumes out on this bright yellow paper with my picture on the resume. And that was before Photoshop and before the internet and everything. And it was unique, and I actually got several phone calls out of that just based on the resume. So I learned right out of college, you've got to stand out from the crowd. And that's what I did. And I think that's part of the reason that I ended up with the job here. One of the first things I learned when I got my job at the LAPD was you get to sit in this desk and you have no budget. No budget. I thought, well, wait a minute. It's public relations and marketing and media relations. You have to have some kind of a budget. If you want to do campaigns, I mean, any PR ad agency will tell you, oh no, you got to have a budget, right? And you can have a small budget, and you can have a big budget, right? In your PR classes, do you guys talk about budgets?
Yes.
Yeah. What's on average, like a budget that an organization of 13,000 people, a company would get?
Minimum of $1 million.
Yeah, minimum. But guess what? The LAPD and the City of Los Angeles have never budgeted a penny for marketing, public relations, or media relations. Never. In fact, the City of Los Angeles doesn't even pay for what is the nation's largest law enforcement website, the most comprehensive. Ours, of course. They don't even pay for it. Well, wait a minute. If I have to have things on that website that you as the public have a right to know, and when we were under the consent decree, we had to have posted, don't you think the city should have to pay for it? No, the city doesn't pay for the website. So I had to figure out right away, how do you do this? how do you communicate on a dime? Because there is, say it with me, no budget. Okay, you guys got to get better at this. Okay, this is interactive here. So we had to get extremely creative. And remember that I come from a police department, or excuse me, I come from a background, a journalism background. And one of the first things that I realized was that, number one, you can do it without a budget. But number two, you have to do it truthfully. You have to do it truthfully, because without the truth, there is no trust. And without trust, there is no success. For law enforcement, bottom line, if your community doesn't trust you because you're not credible, you will not be successful. So we started to change. We started reforming the LAPD. But before we get to that, I got to take you back to why we even had to reform the LAPD. Let's take a look at a little bit of the history of the Los Angeles Police Department. So they started in 1853. They were known as Rangers, 6 of them. Okay, 6 people. But Los Angeles back then was pretty much Olvera Street, and that's all it was. Everything that you see today was not there, not even close. So it was pretty much Olvera Street, and then it kind of grew from there. Today we're the 3rd largest police department in the country, behind New York and Chicago. We have had all kinds of negative, controversial stories, incidents, you name it. The LAPD is well known for many of them, and these are just a few of them. A lot of corruption during the Depression era. Now, you think of 2010, you think of police corruption, more East Coast. It's really more of an East Coast issue than it is a West Coast issue. All right? And in 1942, you had the Zoot Suit riots. Anybody familiar at all with the Zoot Suit riots? Yeah, Google that. It's fascinating. The Watts riots, probably heard about. And then, of course, the Rodney King and the LA riots. The day of the 1992 riots, I'd just come back from maternity leave, and I'm standing in front of police headquarters, which was Parker Center at the time, trapped between a line of police officers, trapped between the protesters, doing live shots, and our cable had been pulled. So everybody was standing on our cable, and I couldn't move. And I'm getting pushed back and forth and back and forth, and eventually got pushed out into the street. And all of a sudden, they started tearing up the trees and anything they could get their hands on and throwing it at the police officers, and we started getting hit with stuff. And this big, hairy arm came out from that line of police officers, grabbed me by the scruff of the neck, and pulled me behind the police line. And I said, I'm going to work for this organization someday, and somebody just saved my life. And here I am today. So these are the things that helped to create the LAPD image, which was a very negative image. And then, of course, the Annenberg scandal. Well, let me tell you, it's never a good thing when you have police officers that are framing suspects, that are stealing cocaine from evidence lockers. You know, it's not a good thing. It's a bad thing. And everybody thought initially it was the whole department that was the problem. All the crash units, all the gang officers were corrupt. No, in reality, it was a couple guys that were doing all of it. But we ended up under a federal consent decree. It was supposed to be a 5-year federal consent decree. It turned out to be from 2001 to 2009. And we are still dealing with parts of the consent decree. But what the consent decree created for the Los Angeles Police Department were changes, reform, that actually has made it a much better police department. And really now has created a department that is considered the leader in law enforcement with best practices. The way we do it, everybody wants to know. How do you do it? And they want to take our information and our training and our processes and our procedures and our policies, and they want to tailor them to their own agencies. We've come a long way since the Rodney King riots, since the Zoot Suit riots, since the Depression era corruption. So in 2001, Chief Bernard Parks decided again that he needed a civilian, and I was hired. Now, back then, I had nobody that I supervised because they didn't know what to do with me. All right? They were like, okay, well, we have this civilian who can do public information, but really, we can't put her in charge of media relations because there's a lieutenant there, and let me tell you, there's a little bit of friction. You know, somebody is like, hey, this is my sandbox, don't complain in my sandbox, I rule my sandbox. So I had to kind of go around the edges of the sandbox, and every now and then kick the sand back in that had fallen out. It's taken almost 10 years for the department and its command staff and its rank and file to understand that it's not such a bad thing to have a civilian doing what I'm doing. Because guess what? I know the media. I did it for 20 years. And I know public relations. And those are things that when police officers go through the academy, believe me, they're not getting marketing and public relations training. They're getting a little bit of media training, but they're not getting what they really need, especially to be able to deal with the media in this day and age, because the media is no longer your traditional media, as you well know. The media is anybody who claims that they're a blogger and sits in their basement in their underwear and writes and steals stuff from other media outlets and claims it as their own. So, today's media, the LAPD didn't want to deal with unless they had a civilian doing it. Now they like me, now they call me all the time. So where am I in the org chart? I'm chief of staff, basically, but I also have direct access to the chief of police. It was that way with Bill Bratton, and it's that way with Chief Charlie Beck. And believe me, that is critical. You have to be able to have that kind of access to the top guy, because he is the messenger for the department. He's the chief department spokesperson, okay? And I have to manage the message. Now, a lot of media training, they'll say control the message. I never believe in controlling the message, because in reality, you can't control the media. You can manage the media, you can manage your message, but you can't control it. So you won't hear me say control it. And if you do, call me on it. So here's our structure. Well, originally when I started, we were a community affairs group, and they had us lumped in with the public affairs officers who work in the community, senior lead officers, community relations officers, all of that. But Bill Bratton said, no, let's split it off. So we were sitting in what they call Staff Officers Annual Retreat. So where all the command staff get out of the city of LA, we sit down and decide what are the goals for the next year. And Bill Bratton wanted to reorganize everything, so they took that org chart and messed it up and changed it and everything. They pulled media relations out of community affairs, and they decided, what else can it have? Well, it can have public communications, which is the PR arm. So let's give Grady media relations and public communications. And then somebody said, well, what about the website? Well, that's kind of media, PR stuff. All right, she can have the website as well. Well, what are we going to call it? Okay, now remember, I'm brand new. I'm with all these command staff, right? And these are all people who've been on the job 20, 30, 40 years ago. And somebody said, well, let's just call it a group, public information group. I put my hand up and I said, no, we will not be pigs. You will not have my office called Pig. Absolutely not. We'll be public information office because we're public information officers. And then shortly thereafter, I went to my supervisor and I said, I need another little box on my org chart. I need an entertainment trademark. And they said, well, what's that? And I said, well, there's a guy named Jim Hahn, who used to be city attorney, who's now mayor. And in 1999, he was very smart. He trademarked the LAPD. The badge, the uniform, the motto, the acronym, it's all trademarked. And he did that knowing that LAPD was iconic, but he also did it for all the other city agencies. So LAFD is also trademarked, et cetera, et cetera. Well, we were getting some requests from the entertainment industry saying, hey, can we use your badge in this movie? Or can we use your badge for this book? Or can we, wanting to use our trademark. So all of a sudden I had to deal with that. And so I had to kind of take a crash course in intellectual property law and work with the city attorney's office. And the city attorney has one guy who handles intellectual property, and working together we created for the city what is now the standard contracts and licensing for intellectual property for most of the city departments. but his busiest client is the LAPD. We get more and more requests. I have, and I'll get into it a little bit more with the entertainment trademark unit. I mean, my one guy who handles this stuff, because again, we have no budget, and the city has no budget, and I've lost 6 staff in the last year. I have one guy who handles it. He deals with the contract database of almost 2,000 contracts. And he walks in on Monday morning and he will have about 16 voice messages for people who want calls, from reality TV shows to location shows, shoots, to people who want to use, we got a request last week, they want to use our use of force compendium, how we do use of force investigations for a new textbook. That's all got to be cleared through the intellectual property. So, started the entertainment trademark unit. So let's go through each of them. Media relations section. What do? They do a lot. News releases, news conferences, more than 600 news releases a year, about 400 news advisories, hundreds of news conferences every year. We do them by the seat of our pants better than anybody I know. And believe me, we'll get a phone call in the morning saying we need a news conference at 2 o'clock this afternoon, and we pull it together. Now, PR agencies, and I know I've had a lot of interns, they say there's no way they can do that. Ad agency, they need at least a month to put a news conference together. I say, nope, we do it in a matter of hours. And we do it every day, we've gotten so good at it. But that's not all they do. Besides the news advisories, they also do NIXL notifications. Everybody know what NIXL is? Okay, you're all going to want to do this afterwards. Let me give you our web address, lapdonline.org. Okay? Scroll down on the right nav. There's a little box that says NIXL, N-I-X-L-E. Click on NIXL, and you can sign up for advisories, alerts, notifications from your community police station. Your USC property, what's your community police station? What LAPD station serves the USC campus? Our Southwest station. So you can sign up for alerts, advisories, information from our Southwest area station. If there's a prowler, if there's an increase in bicycle thefts, if there's an increase in burglary thefts from vehicles because people are leaving stuff like laptops in their car, which people do, you're going to get notifications about it. NIXL. We do NIXL notifications as often as we do the advisory notifications, okay? Press passes. We have over 2,000 press passes that we deal with. That includes background checks for media members. That includes reissuing them. We do them on a 3-year basis because it would be too time-consuming and resource-heavy. We just don't have the resources to do that. So we do that as well. We do a monthly media availability for the chief every month. Put them out there to the media so they know what's going on. We update crime statistics and try and find a number of interesting stories. And we do them, if we can, on a Thursday, so I get a weekend's worth of stories out of it. And believe me, I do, because I listen on the weekends to the radio and watch TV, and I'm all over the internet. Newsmaker Project, our officers, public information officers, are divided up into several different bureaus. We have 4 bureaus in the city: South Bureau, West Bureau, Valley Bureau, Central Bureau. We have 21 area stations that are scattered throughout those bureaus, okay? Our PIOs are assigned a bureau. It's up to them to try and find out what are the good news stories happening in the bureau that they're assigned. They got to make calls. They got to get to know the watch commanders. They have to be like a reporter. They have to dig like a reporter to get the good PR stories. Then it's up to them to create either a news conference or a news release to generate some interest in the department. Then, of course, breaking news. Jerry mentioned a little something happened on the way. I parked my car, got my laptop, saw an alert on my BlackBerry, looked at it, and we had just gotten a call from Good Morning America. And they had found some video on Radar Online. Posted, apparently, by a production company, or shot by a production company, shooting a reality TV show that had made a false call to 911 that caused a police response. So LAPD showed up, and it's not really a call, it was a reality show. Do you think that's a problem? Absolutely. Could there be something criminal? I immediately told my staff, start looking into it, see what the legal issues are, see if there's any trademark violations. When I get back, we'll deal with it. Because Good Morning America now wants to do a story on it. Believe me, it's not the first time it's happened. So those are just some of the issues. That's kind of the breaking news situations. What do you think in the last several years for me was the biggest breaking news story that happened for the LAPD? Just within the last 2 years. I had almost no sleep for 2 weeks.
MacArthur Park.
Nope.
An entertainment figure.
Michael Jackson. Yep. I literally had almost no sleep for 2 weeks.
You lost sleep over Michael.
When the king of pop dies, trust me, everybody comes out of the woodwork, and not just the media. That was the biggest breaking news story in almost 10 years I've been with the department that I've had to deal with. A celebrity dying. Hard to believe, but true. Okay, public relations unit. Now, if I sat here and told you everything that my people did, you would be here for hours, so I can't do that. But just to give you kind of an idea, our public relations unit, which includes the public communications section, which includes the online unit, and I'll get to them in a second, is about 10 people. But our public relations unit consists of 1 public relations specialist and 2 police officers. I had 3 other PR people, but they were all, their authorities or their positions were gotten rid of in the budget. So 1 went over to the district attorney's office and the other 2 went over to Department of Water and Power. So I lost 3 PR people. So I have 3 people that handle all the public relations duties, okay? And we do a number of things. We do all the chief's messaging. Every month he puts together a column for the unions, the Police Protective League's newspaper and their newsletter. We also do a video message. That message also goes out internally and it's also put on our website. A lot of redundancy built in. We also write for a number of police functions. Recognition Day, Medal of Valor, and any of our commendations. That is hundreds of scripts a year for all of those things. Again, the chief's message, and then we have a media outreach campaign with both our Spanish and our Asian Pacific Islander campaigns. But besides all of those things, let's see, some of the other things. We also do a thing called Cop Talk, which is our internal communication. I realized that, you know, our hardworking men and women are out in the field answering 911 calls, running all over the city, and we have this civilian panel, 5 people who are making decisions for this department, the policy decisions, the procedure decisions that affect what the men and women in the field are doing. Yet that information never was drilled down to them. They never really knew what was happening. So we created a thing called Cop Talk, Chief of Police Talk, on our internal network. And we update it weekly. We tell them what's going on in police commission, any testing dates that are coming up, all, you know, just information for them so that they felt like they knew what was going on. I mean, yes, my main responsibility is communicating externally to the public, but you can't forget your internal communications, okay? If the chief wants to have a success story to tell, he's got to have cops that are doing the work, but the cops need to be informed about what's happening, all right? And there are critical decisions being made in police commission that deal with their work every single day, so they had to be informed. So we created a thing called Cop Talk. We also do a year in review for our website, an annual year in review. We also have a blog, and the public relations folks are the reporters for our blog. They also podcast. And in the new building, which we've been in a year now, and they're still continuing to build out some of it. When we were designing the new building, I designed a TV studio for media relations, which we have and it's being used today. And then I also designed a production room because we didn't have our own video production. So all we do right now is podcasting, but I would say probably beginning next year, Once I can get, hopefully, one of our videographers that I have to steal from the training division, I'll tell them how to do that, we're going to actually start putting news conferences and things on the LAPD online. So they do that. We also have an annual essay contest, which I'll get into a little bit more. We have a newsletter, monthly newsletter, and we have LAPD sports. You know, again, not wanting to forget our officers. We actually are the only law enforcement agency that has a sports page on its website that talks about all of the department sports teams. And let me tell you, any sport you can think of, we have a team. And our officers, we have a literally professional football team, basketball team, baseball, and believe me, our teams, they win. At the police and fire games, they win. And a lot of the people who play on these teams are former professional athletes. We had a former LA Laker, former Dallas Cowboy, and go on and on. A number of former professional sports players, and they play on our teams. And so it's for the public to help understand and to humanize the officers. When they see that, they're like, oh, you know, they're not just these people in uniform who act tough, who, you know, sometimes don't communicate well, or they're mean when they give me a ticket, you know. So we wanted to humanize them a little and gave the officers something for them. And so we have an LAPD sports page. So those are just some of the things that the public relations unit does. Now, because I'm so short-staffed, I also have to cross-train some of those people. So besides all of those duties, they also help the online unit because we are the repository for public emails. And we get thousands of them every month. And within those emails are complaints. And complaints shall be taken. So whenever you hear the word shall in the police department, that means, oh yeah, you better do it. If you don't do it, you're going to get what they call a comment card, which goes in your personnel package, and it gets a little ugly. So you shall take complaints. So we have to go through every single email. Okay, that takes time, and you have to respond, and you have to say, okay, this person needs to know that, so now I got to figure out who has the answer to that, and I got to send it off to them. It takes a lot of time. So basically, 3 people in public relations doing everything I talked about, and then I also cross-train them to answer emails. And because I only have one guy in the entertainment trademark unit, and that unit, the requests are overwhelming him, I now need to cross-train my PR people to also handle some of the entertainment trademark. Okay, you guys getting a little headache and a little dizzy at this point? Trust me, that's my life every single day. Trying to figure out how do I do all of this, again, with no budget. Right. But I have staff, some staff. Okay, so now we go to our Asian and Spanish media outreach. These are some of the stations that we regularly and consistently do things with. Now, why is it important to do that? Why is it important to reach out to our demographic audience? Because not everybody speaks English. And the city of Los Angeles is more than 50% in Spanish, all right? And our API population is very large. But we're very lucky. We have one of the largest Asian Pacific Islander television stations in the world. And we work with them regularly, as we do many of the Spanish television and radio stations on a consistent basis, making sure we are reaching out to them specifically to work with them so that we're communicating with all of our audiences. Annual LAPD essay contest, this is one of those feel-good kind of things that we do. It's a good public relations tool. We started it 8 years ago, and we thought, you know what, we just want to see what young people would do. If you asked them a question, like if you were a police officer, how would you help solve your problems? And we've used that pretty much every year, or we may change it up a little here and there. Partnerships with a number of the Spanish stations, because we find that the bulk of the submissions are from Spanish-speaking students. And it's also an opportunity to kind of plant that seed for those young people to think about a career in law enforcement someday. Because they get to go to one of the morning shows, and then they get a special breakfast, and the chief gives them all kinds of awards, including bicycles and saving bonds and tickets to the Hollywood Bowl and the IMAX Theater. They get all kinds of cool prizes, right? So they do it for the prizes, but then when they come and they experience all of this, I think we just put some letters out to the last 80 winners to kind of see where are they today, what are they doing, to try and get a sense, to kind of measure the effectiveness of this campaign. See how they're doing, and we're waiting to hear back. But again, plant that seed. LAPD Online. Created in 1998, we did a complete redesign in 2006. We've added a number of things to it. We have a newsroom, which is where you find all of our advisories and news releases and everything. A couple years ago, we created LAPD TV, and that's where our video content goes on LAPD. E-policing, put in your address in the city of Los Angeles, and the senior lead officer that's responsible for policing your neighborhood, where you live, where you do business, the stores that you go to. You will get emails telling you about what's coming up and what's happening at in your community police station in your area. So it's a push. It's a way to do community policing through email. Nixel, talked to you about that already. Crime Stoppers, getting people to report to us information to help us make arrests. Crime mapping. We had LAPD crime maps, got rid of that because we have something new and improved coming soon. So check after the first of the year. It's going to be pretty amazing. Some new crime mapping. The blog I mentioned, and a thing called iWatch. It's right over here. Anybody familiar with iWatch? Well, you will be before you leave here because that's my campaign and I'm going to push it. All right, Entertainment Trademark Unit. We mentioned that. First city department to enforce the intellectual property rights. We do everything from trademark licensing, copyright, merchandise, location agreements, access clip agreements, and things called covenant not to sue. Basically, if you're using my marks and you don't create any merchandise with my marks, I won't sue you. Okay? There are currently 4 television dramas on right now that use the LAPD. Can you name them?
Law and Order.
Law and Order LA is one.
NCIS Los Angeles.
Kind of. Somewhat they use it. They haven't come to us yet, and we haven't seen any trademark violations. We also have to monitor that, but you could kind of count that one. But there's 3 others that specifically use LAPD. See, they're all studying so hard. They don't watch television.
They don't own television. They don't know what television is.
They watch it on the internet. Southland? Oh, Dark Blue. Anybody watch Dark Blue at all? It's a TNT show. Yeah. And what about Kira Sedgwick's show? The Closer, right? So those are just 4 shows that are using LAPD. Doesn't even begin to tell you all the requests that I get for reality-based shows. I get pitches, probably 5 pitches a week.
Do they pay you? Do they pay the LAPD some kind of licensing fee?
Yeah, I'm going to get to that in a second. So, like I said, I get about 5 pitches on paper, and sometimes we'll hold a meeting. This week, we met with some folks who want to do a show and basically sit there in our communications center and hear the 911 calls and then go. That's probably not going to work because there's some privacy issues there. That's one pitch. Another pitch was they want to do a show on women in the LAPD, kind of like, the Dallas women, Miami ones, but I'm not feeling the warm and fuzzies on that one. But we get a lot of these pitches. Now, if we sign a trademark agreement with a television show to do a series, yes, we can charge to license the mark per episode, and the city attorney negotiates all of that. But the city charter also tells us that if I work with just you, and I give just you that exclusive access to the LAPD, you have to reimburse personnel costs, because I'm not allowing anybody else to do that. So, the money comes back, but it doesn't come directly to the LAPD. It goes into the city's intellectual property fund, and then I have to ask for permission to use any of the money that's in there. Right now, the only time I use that money is to pay for the storage of some of our archive photos. We have about 1 million negatives that date back to the early 1920s. We've gone through 40,000 of them. And when I say we've gone through, you put white gloves on, you pull a negative out of an envelope, and you look at it and say, okay, this one looks interesting, we should print this one. We have 1 million of those to go through. There's no funding to do it right now. So we're trying to figure out what we're going to do, and right now I'm storing them to keep them from deteriorating, because some of them are silver nitrate, and so I have to pay the storage costs, so that's where we're using some of the IP money to do some of that. So, TV shows, documentaries, movies, books, like I said, I have one guy who now has a database of about almost 2,000 contracts. Everybody wants law enforcement. I mean, just look at cable television, all the reality TV shows based on something to do with law enforcement. And who do they go to first? Well, who do they think people will want to watch? The LAPD. So I get requests from all over the country. You know what country I get almost more requests from, or about the same number of requests as I do from the United States? The United Kingdom. They are fascinated with the LAPD. They love the LAPD. And they want LAPD shows. So I deal with a lot of folks from England who want to, put LAPD on in the UK. And then these are just, besides overseeing all of this and creating strategies and, dealing with breaking news and all that stuff, just a few of the other things that I do. I work with the other cities' PIOs to create communication strategies, in fact, crisis communication strategies. My office, my aide and I last year created an actual blueprint for crisis communication for the city's Emergency Operations Center. And we're working on finalizing that. I do terrorism training drills. Whenever this department trains and drills, there's got to be a media component, so I usually do that along with some of my PIOs. I do a lot of speaking engagements to try and get the word out about what we do with the LAPD. We have a Christmas toy and book drive every year that I oversee. I'm the liaison to the mayor's office and city council offices. Crisis communication plan, the iWatch campaign. That campaign is what's going to be used by any one of you or anybody else in our communities to stop an act of terrorism. That's your way to report suspicious activities or behaviors that you may see, that you may think this isn't right. It's called the iWatch campaign. You go to our website, you click on that, it'll tell you all about it. I've spent the last year publicizing it across the United States. The U.S. Army just adopted it, Dallas adopted it, Canada is interested in using it. We're pushing it out throughout the city. You'll see posters at LAX. They're going to be in the buses soon. We're going to the ports next week to talk about pushing it out of the port. It's basically, if you see something, it's not an individual, but a behavior or activity that you think is suspicious, you don't need to know whether or not, you don't need to make that decision. We'll let the experts decide. There's an actual online reporting system on the web, or you call 1-877-8-THREAT. And that will be the way we stop a major terrorist attack. What happened in New York recently? Times Square, SUV, big bomb in it, thankfully didn't blow up. Who alerted authorities? A vendor, a street vendor, who happened to be Muslim, by the way. I always make sure I add that in there because the Muslim community says, but people need to know it was a Muslim, American Muslim that did that. And it was. He saw something and he said something. Okay? That's what the iWatch campaign's about. And we're using, that's also what the Department of Homeland Security is using, see something, say something, so we're doing that. Now, how much do you think it would cost to create a campaign like this? And take it across the nation. Lots of money, right? No. There's no budget for it, right? We've gotten really good at begging, pleading, and creating relationships that help us to achieve what we need. There's a company out of Washington that basically helped us design the logo and pay for the first round of posters and brochures that we used. Okay? We had a training video for the community. It's on the iWatch page if you watch it. If we had to pay for that, it would have cost over $500,000. It was done pro bono by people in the entertainment industry for us. Okay? We use our video games in the training division to do other public service announcements. My web folks, who are cops, who have self-taught themselves how to build a website and do all this cool stuff on our website. I mean, they sit there and they go home and they research and, they want to figure it out. They created the iWatch page. So we do a lot of things for free because there is no budget. We do get grants every now and then. I just got a grant to produce another training video in some of the money that's been given away by the federal government to cities. And we are Actually today, they're shooting in our TV studio, part of those training videos, and it's about taking actual cases where somebody reported suspicious activity that they saw, that once we looked at it, there were actual links to terrorism. Okay? So we're working on that video right now. We also just got about $13,000 for more posters and brochures. We just redid the brochure in English and Spanish. We're working on the Korean one right now. You're going to see posters at all our police stations, fire stations, all the buses, and we're going to be rolling it out as soon as we get all that put.
Mary, just a time check. It's quarter of. We want to make sure that we have plenty of time for questions and discussion.
And I'm almost done. Okay, so do I get any money from the city? I get $1,900 a year for office supplies. That's what I get. My PIO staff has been cut by 6 people. We have hiring freezes right now. We have all this new technology. I also handle the social media stuff. I'm Mary Grady PIO on Twitter, and I regularly tweet what's going on with the department. Like during the Lakewood Parade, I was tweeting like crazy. We have an iWatch Facebook page. Now, I also have a personal Facebook page, but what I've discovered is all my friends are my former colleagues in the media and everybody else in the media who thinks that if they're my Facebook friend, I'm going to tell them everything that's going on in the department in any secret. So that's turned into something I have to deal with. So the new technology is great, but it actually creates more work for us. And managing the message means monitoring the media. I spend hours a day, even on the weekends, monitoring the media. I have to, because I have to know what's out there. I can't be surprised about what's out there involving LAPD. But our biggest issue is we only have 9,900 officers. And in reality, the city of Los Angeles should have 17,000 to be on par with New York City. We should have 17,000 police officers in the city of Los Angeles. But the city has never funded that, never budgeted for that many police officers. So we have 9,900 very dedicated, very, very dedicated men and women. And I have some of them in public information, which is why we are able to do what we're able to do. Again, we go back to where we started. If we're not credible, people won't trust us. If we're not trusted, we won't be successful. Now I'm done.
Excellent. Any questions?
I have a question. On top of everything else you do, are you able to do some assessment on any image changes within the department through time?
I would love to have the time to put a fabulous report together. No. I mean, do I monitor? It's all done as I do my monitoring in the media. And unfortunately, the one thing that we just don't have time for are those kinds of things. We can measure our website usage. We can measure what people want to see. But I think clearly, just in some of the reporting, you've seen the image change. You've seen the transformation. You've seen, and a lot of it had to do with Bill Bratton. Because Bill Bratton was very media savvy. He was a PIO when he was at Boston PD. So he knew what he was doing, and he loved the media. So I feel so fortunate that I started with the department at the same time Bill Bratton came, because he was a change agent, and the LAPD needed a change agent. And the best way to start working on an image is if you got a guy at the top who is saying transparency, trust, constitutional policing, compassionate policing. You know, all those things are the kind of messaging and the kind of public relations image building things. One of the first things he said when he did his acceptance speech is, I want to put the shine back on that badge. And that's what we spent the last many years working hard to do.
I'm just curious, who can take your position? It seems like this is just so
overwhelming.
Yeah.
You know what? Nobody's irreplaceable. And put it this way, somebody else could come in and maybe have some different ideas. I mean, change is not a bad thing. Change is a good thing. Change breeds creativity. And sometimes we get stale. But I very much believe in a team concept. When I hold my supervisors' meetings, I don't say we're going to do it this way, this way, and this way, which is hard for them sometimes, especially the swarm, because they come from that militaristic, training that says, I'm your superior, and I'm going to tell you what to do, and you will do it, and you will say yes, ma'am. I mean, that's the way they're trained in the academy. So they come into my office and it's like, okay, so what are your ideas? And they go, if I say something and she doesn't like it, is that going to be marked against me? Is it going to hurt her promotion? But no, I try and get them to open up and give me an idea. And now when I get an assignment, like we're talking, you know, we've got to put together the chief's media strategy for 2011. So I said to my folks the other day, I said, okay, next supervisors meeting, bring your ideas for his strategy. What's worked this past year, what hasn't worked, what should we be doing more of? I'm always asking for that input. So in reality, it's not just me. And in fact, without the staff that I have, I could not even think of doing half of what we do. The reason the LAPD is successful in the media relations, public relations business is because I have a very dedicated staff of individuals. Police officers who have no training in media relations and public relations, but yet who have been willing to step into that office and put on a reporter's hat and learn how to do it and get very good at it.
I'm in an investigative journalism course here, and one of our assignments is to constantly access public records, search warrants, criminal court case documents, things like that. And I wonder, does access to that and the policies that surround access to public records, does that fall under your jurisdiction?
Yes, and if you go to our webpage on the left nav, I think it's right underneath the NICSL and right under our Media Relations Handbook, which is also something that I created when I got to the department, is the California Public Records Act, the actual language. We make it available to the public and say, here's what you can have, here's what you can't have, here's what you have access to, what you don't, and here's the rules about getting it. So we get some of those requests. My staff doesn't actually handle them all. We send them to our discovery section. And they're the folks who do those requests for the media and also for attorneys.
I have two questions. The first one is, in the LAPD structure, who or which department did public relations report to? And the second one
I report to the chief of staff, who's right under the chief of police.
Okay. And the second one is, there's no budget for you, so where do your money come from?
Well, we have a police foundation that thankfully, its nonprofit mission is to fund those items, training, equipment, things for the department that the city budget does not fund. And so thankfully, the police foundation pays for our website, and they pay for the blog, and then again, we go out into the community and find people who are willing to support our projects and our campaigns. The iWatch campaign, the Police Foundation paid a little bit of money for some printing, but again, many of there were companies in Washington that believed in what we were doing, that provided funding, entertainment companies that created the training video and public service announcements for us as well, and then we got some grant money. So we look to the federal government if we can get some grant money for some things. And right now there's grant money for some things in counterterrorism. Most of it's for equipment and for the analysis and intelligence, not so much for the public relations. But when we can get little bits, we try and grab as much as we can. And that's how we do it.
Another question. With your work, how have you seen the image of the LAPD change?
Dramatically. Because if I'm getting that many calls from television writers and producers who want to do TVs and movies on the LAPD, and the scripts and stories aren't negative, but they're positive, that tells me a lot. That tells me that it's shifted, it's changed, and that people want to have brand loyalty to their police department. The LAPD is not my department, it's your department. It's yours. And you have to be as involved in it as possible, which is why we are so successful today, because one of the things that this whole reform and change has created is community trust and participation. We had a little 5-year-old boy who was shot and killed on Halloween when he was in a Spider-Man costume. Do you know within a day or two of that shooting, we knew who did it? You know why we knew who did it? Because we did a news conference right away and the community was outraged. And they said, enough is enough. And guess what? We did a news conference on Friday saying, we got him, they're behind bars. So that to me, is probably one of the greatest measures of our success. When you have people in neighborhoods that 10 years ago would never have picked up the phone and called the LAPD and dime off who shot a 5-year-old boy. Now they do it like that. That is a measure of our success.
In the audience, we've got a mixture of journalism students and public relations students. And so I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the nature of the relationship between your office and the press and reporters. And I'm assuming there's probably a range of relationships. Some smooth as silk and others not so smooth. Can you tell us about that? About what's the relationship like? What's your responsibility to them and their responsibility to you?
We actually had, when I was a reporter and I worked with the LAPD, relations were very difficult. When I started with the LAPD, it didn't change overnight. It took many years to get us there. And probably the one thing that was a catalyst for the most lasting change that we've had is May Day, where you had some officers who manhandled some members of the media. Because that happened, we created a media committee with the Radio Television News Association, the Press Photographers Association, a number of the journalism organizations in town, and we meet regularly and we deal head-on with issues. And we've created some very positive working relationships. And my number one mission in media relations is to be responsive to the media, to give them the access that they need at scenes, which is why we do all this training. We train, officers get training in the academy. We've also, media relations has added training in our supervisor schools, in our watch commander schools. I do command development training. We bring our lieutenants together that are on the captain's list. They get a full day of training with me, talking about how to work with the media, how to create positive news stories, how to provide access, how to do news conferences, write news releases. I mean, we're doing the kind of training that this department never did before. Next month I have a detective school. I've got to sit down and work with detectives and help detectives understand that by holding their cases like this and not talking to the public, it's not going to help them catch who did it. And sometimes these guys will continue to commit crimes until we do catch them. So here's the reasons why we want to put some information out. So a lot of the training we do has actually helped the media and improved our relationship with the media. Because now they'll go to a scene and, you know, the guy at the tape will say, okay, my sergeant said to keep everybody out, but you remember the media, and we've created a media area for you over here because you have a right to be where the public is, and the guy who lives across the street's right there. So okay, so you can go there now. They know that now. They've been trained on that. So the relationships that we have with the media now are much better than they were. Is it perfect all the time? Absolutely not. But are we responsive when there's a problem? Absolutely. Because that's my number one mission, be responsive to the media.
I know we got to close it off, but I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the police shooting of the Latino man. I'm forgetting his name, but there certainly were elements of people in
Rampart.
Yeah, people in the community who've been very upset about that. So, did you all have to do a kind of crisis? You know, what was that like?
Yes, in fact, we were dealing with doing strategies as it was unfolding. That was one of the things that really kind of caught us by surprise, because if that happened anywhere else in the city, you may not have had that kind of response. The problem with that one in particular is you had a certain segment of the Latino population, the Guatemalan community, which has been feeling very disenfranchised. And the underlying issue of that whole story, which really helped to trigger it, was the illegal vending that's going on in that area of the city. I don't know if anybody's ever driven down 3rd Street on a Friday night in that 2 or 3 block area. You can't walk down the sidewalks. Everybody's got their blankets laid out with all the stuff they're selling in front of the stores that pay city taxes to be able to operate. So you have store owners that don't like the vendors, vendors who don't like the store owners, and the police are in the middle of it trying to enforce the illegal vending. Well, that was the underlying issue. And you also had community activists who came from other parts of the city and used that officer-involved shooting as an opportunity to get people riled up. Because you haven't had that happen. I mean, if you think about it, the last big controversy was the May Day. And so it was an opportunity for people to do that. So it kind of caught us by surprise. Because in reality, we have a number of witnesses. And this, I'm not going to tell you anything you haven't heard already. We have witnesses who say absolutely he had a knife. We have a knife that has blood on it. We have the actual people who say he was trying to stab them with the knife. We have one person who was across the street who claims she didn't see a knife. And of course the media, glommed onto her in part because the other witnesses did not want to come forward and say, yes, I actually did see the knife because of everything that was going on. So yes, we were strategizing as it was going on, and we're currently strategizing because we will probably be right after the first of the year, have the adjudication of that case. And depending on the adjudication, if the officer is found to be in policy, we don't want it to cause another situation. So we are actually creating a media strategy as we speak to try and prevent some of that and get out to the community. And what's happening now in this time while the investigation is going on, you actually have the area captain and the Central Bureau chief working very hard to create a very positive, strong relationship with the Guatemalan community. And that's actually happening because they're not feeling as disenfranchised. And they've been included, and we're working with them on the illegal vending issues through the city council office that represents that area. So there's a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes.
Mary, thank you so much for coming.
You're
Thanks,
welcome.